I know that you didn't take methamphetamines, but you considered it. Appearance changed so much that when she knocked on the door coming home for help, her mum didn't even recognise her.
If every pint tasted as good as the first one, we'd all have a problem.
Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with investigative journalist and author of the book Meth Road, Connor Woodman. Welcome back, Connor.
Thanks.
In part 1, we discussed how Connor tracked the source of methamphetamines into Australia from, of all places, Myanmar. In this part, we're going to look closer at what happens when the drug arrives here. So this is the impact that has on people in Australia. I just want to ask you this question up front. You've talked about you're an investigative journalist and you like to have boots on the ground. I know that you didn't take methamphetamines, but you considered it. That as part of your research, and okay, I'm talking about this drug. Why don't I take it? I can understand the concept, and I think you've demonstrated in part 1 you're not afraid of taking risks. But you shied away from sampling methamphetamine for yourself on this one. Why is that?
Yeah, I did. I thought, oh, I'll go gonzo with this. I'll find myself, down in the valley in Brisbane or something with some meth users, and I'll give it a go, and I'll be able to write about the experience from the inside. And then when I actually spent some time hanging out with meth users, I think I just decided it really wasn't for me. It didn't. It didn't seem like a good recreational choice to me.
Yeah.
Other drugs are available, and maybe if I'd been writing about another drug, maybe I would have made a different decision. But with meth, I was quite clear. This wasn't something that I really wanted to do, and that I wanted to get into. That's not to say that I didn't have some, very interesting times.
Yeah.
Getting to know some people that were meth users, and I did. I spent an awful lot of time with people who were on meth, in the company of people who were on meth, and trying to get a better understanding of the effects that meth had and what was appealing to them about the drug. But no, for me, it was quite clear it wasn't something I wanted to do.
Okay, let's talk about some of those people that you met, and I've made a couple of names here: Shawnee, Andrea, Luke, Sam, the psychiatrist. All had different stories, all had different impacts on the ice. Andrea, her appearance changed so much that when she knocked on the door coming home for help, her mum didn't even recognise her. Can you tell us a little bit about her story?
Yeah, so I think she's quite a rare character in that someone who was a very problematic user, I think she would say, full addict, who'd got into meth quite late in life. She was a mum of 2 kids, very successful, lots of money. But personal situations in her life became difficult, and she, I guess, found herself wanting something else in life, and met another guy who offered her some methamphetamine. Again, like the guy we were talking about earlier, had never been a drug user in her life, but said, well, why not? I'll give it a go. And then very quickly, her life unraveled until 2 years later, she was using habitually on a daily basis, had spent all of her savings, had remortgaged the house, had sold the car, had sold the jewelry, had gone completely AWOL, and had even been left for dead, I think, by some of the people that she was taking meth with one night, because they thought, oh, she's checked out.
Yeah.
Which I think probably was her, rock bottom moments when she thought, okay, enough's enough. I've got to do something about this. Where can I go? And she went home, knocked on her mum's door, and her own mother didn't recognize her on the doorstep.
It's frightening, isn't it?
So ravaged was she, I think, that she was, she had to kind of say, Mum, it's me. Yeah. I mean, heartbreaking story. But that in itself is not maybe an uncommon story. But what's very uncommon about her is that she has stopped taking meth successfully. Yeah, she's she's been kind of dry or clean, or however you want to put it, for a really long period of time, which is unfortunately very rare.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to break, but it just goes to show the impact that it can have, the life, how it spirals out of control. I was interested in the other. Oh, all of them had interesting stories, but Sam, the psychiatrist. So yeah, a doctor, and you would think of all people. Well, you know the risks associated with it. Tell us about his story and his observations, because I think it's interesting that he can look at it from his medical point of view, but also his own personal journey.
Yeah, I found talking to him fascinating, actually, because I kind of felt like the whole time I was on one hand talking to a psychiatrist, on the other hand I was talking to someone with a lived experience of meth use, and he had such an interesting double take on everything, because he was constantly evaluating what it was like to be both sides of the fence. And he's someone who, I mean, he said a few things to me. He was one of the first people who said, that ER room TV spot, that's not how it is. We need to stop saying that's how it is. And he was also someone who said to me, the effects of methamphetamine. I mean, he got himself into problematic use. He was someone who thought he could keep a grip on recreational use, like so many people, using a little bit, and it got out of hand, to the point where he couldn't practice anymore. But he was lucky, I guess, insofar as he was a guy from a good background, from a good family, and his family stepped in and staged an intervention for him and helped him kind of get off the meth and kind of get back to work now, actually. So again, another success story. Success stories do exist, but even someone with the insight that he had, like you say, someone who was a psychiatrist, someone who knew the lay of the land, knew the risks, knew what he was kind of getting himself into, could still get to a situation where his use became problematic, and it had an effect on his life and his job and his career and his family and all those other things. So time and again I came across people who would talk about the benefits of meth, the things that they liked about meth, things that had got them into meth in the first place, but then at the same time, having come out the other side, had a cautionary tale to tell. But they still had this, it's so often people still have this lingering, oh yeah, but it did make me feel really good.
Yeah, that's I suppose the danger of the drug, isn't it? That's that attraction's still there. You made a connection between that and alcohol, the feel that you get with alcohol, up to a point, then you tip over. Like, I don't know about you, but after maybe 2 or 3 beers, I'm at my peak. I'm at my happiness. The world is a great place, but if you keep drinking, that doesn't necessarily stay. So I'd imagine the drug use...
My late father used to say, if every pint tasted as good as the first one, we'd all have a problem.
Yeah, that's right. You said you spent a lot of time with people that were addicted to it or trying to come off it. You had some, not staying, but you spent time in some group homes and where a group of addicts had been talking. Talk us about the vibe that you picked up there and what that was like.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely followed the conversations that were going on all the time. I think I'm going to say, I've been in those kind of group situations in different. I'm a kid of the rave generation. I grew up in nightclubs in the UK in the 90s. I've heard lots of fractured conversations, but meth was quite interesting in that I remember sitting in a hostel in Brisbane, and there were 6 people around. They'd all taken methamphetamine, and there was a kind of flow to the conversation. Like, people would pick up on something, and it would come back to some sort of thread, but there would be sort of 3 or 4 other kind of tangential conversations that were going on at the same time. And at times I wondered, is everyone else in on this? Is everyone else following what's going on and I'm the only one? Do I need to be on meth to be part of the club? but everyone was still quite happy. Like I said earlier, there's something quite disassociative that I I felt when I was around people that were taking meth that they were kind of untroubled by anything else that was going on in their lives. They were very present in that moment. And sometimes that meant that they weren't capable of listening to what the other person sitting next to them was saying.
Yeah.
But then maybe they didn't mind that either. Would you have the same experience with like four drunk guys at a bar? Maybe
possibly like at certain level, and I think we've all got those friends that if they drink too much, just talk, and it's just a ramble, and you just switch off. And I know the type of environment you're talking about. I've spent time in there when I was in the police, in places like that, and even after the police. And I think you described it very well. It's sort of a group of rambling conversations that there's some connection points here, there, but it just seems to go off on different tangents. But everyone seems fully occupied with whatever they're talking about.
Yeah, and quite happy. I mean, I was quite surprised actually at how many people I encountered taking methamphetamine just in everyday situations in Australia. It's everywhere. I drove down to Dubbo, which I don't know anyone else who's been to Dubbo. It's maybe from the UK.
A lot of time in Dubbo in the homicide squad. A lot of time up there.
Yeah, I mean, amazing place, but it's got a really big methamphetamine user population there. And I drove down there. I get up quite early, and I was filling the car up at, I don't know, it must be about 6:30 in the morning, and some guy appeared next to me on the forecourt. G'day, mate. What are you putting in there? You go, oh, unleaded, is it? Oh, right. I thought you'd be a diesel guy. I suddenly realised, hang on a second. Have you been to bed, mate? And he's like, oh, no, I haven't been to bed. I thought, right, I know what you've been doing. Couldn't have been happier. Very, very affable. But clearly had been taking methamphetamine.
Yeah.
And just wanted to have a chat. And I thought then that there's something, the disinhibition that comes with taking methamphetamine and the hours that it encourages people to keep, I think puts methamphetamine users into public situations maybe more than other things. I likened it to, like, last time I'm Irish, right? So, Irish weddings tend to be quite drunken affairs. And if I think back to the last Irish wedding I was at and how hammered I probably was at midnight, if you took 12 midnight Connor at an Irish wedding and put him on a garage forecourt in Dubbo, I'd be frightening. Like, you wouldn't want to.
Okay,
you'd see me and go, "Geez, that guy needs some help."
It's in context where everyone's drunk at the wedding.
Yeah,
and that's it. Connor's behaviour is normal for that. But if you were at the shops at 9 o'clock in the morning,
exactly,
talking to everyone that you walk past,
Yeah, exactly. So context is everything, and I think because we all tend to drink alcohol at the same time, in the evening, and it's self-limiting. We all fall over and fall asleep, by 1 o'clock in the morning. We're all kind of in it together, and like you say, no one's wandering around in the shops drunk at 9 o'clock in the morning. And if they are, then they're deemed to have
they're
a problem.
The problem ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We've talked about supply from the where it was manufactured. It gets to Australia. The way that the AFP and Border Force stopped the importation of the large importations, and that's where you hear it on the news at a large scale, 1 tonne of this, and big time seizures of drugs trying to come into the border. Then you hear other times with the state police where it's a clandestine lab's been stopped or discovered. Where do you think on supply? Where do you think has the biggest? Because to reduce drugs, and I think you've described it as 4 pillars, and we'll go into that later on. But you've got the supply, comes to the borders. Do you think the AFP and Border Force, we should put our attention there, stopping it coming in, or in state police?
Yeah, AFP and Border Force, absolutely. It's not even close. So yeah, I think you're right. So supply reduction, if you're going to take supply reduction seriously, and personally, I mean, there's arguments for and against it. I think you should do, because I think you're never going to win that war, but you will definitely make a dent. I think the Australian Border Force and the AFP are incredibly effective, a really effective unit they're still stopping probably just slightly less than half of the methamphetamine that's coming into the country. But I was surprised it was as much as that. Like, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I was genuinely impressed. If 10 tons of meth are being consumed every year from the wastewater analysis, we know that, they're picking up 5, 6, 7, 8 tons coming into the country. But I would argue, if you then look at, how much money you spend on the AFP and on the border force for that 8 tons of confiscation, and compare that with what you're spending on state police operations to shut down, clandestine labs, which are these days in Australia are tiny. We can talk about the one that I saw up in Gold Coast, but if the bang for your buck, if you like, the amount of meth you're actually stopping hitting the streets for every dollar that you're spending is, I crunched the numbers in the book, it's like 12, 15 times more effective spent on the federal police and the border force.
Okay.
So I would say at times when money is tight, and money's tight for every country at the moment, and you do want to make a dent in supply reduction, because I think it's important you do that, because I think it keeps prices high. And I think for a recreational user, for a solicitor or a doctor who's taking meth maybe 3 or 4 times a year when they go to a nightclub, $50 a point or $10 a point doesn't make any difference. It's not going to make any, But for problematic users on the streets, I think if the price of methamphetamine dropped to $10 a point, they would take more. And I think you'd have more deaths, you'd have more hospitalizations, you'd have more mental health issues. So I think it's important that you do engage in effective supply reduction strategies, but I think they should be done at a macro level that the federal police and the border force are doing. Okay,
that's interesting, and I agree with what you're saying. If more got in and prices went down, more people would use. It just seems basic economics.
Yeah, maybe more people would use, or maybe the people that use would use more.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure if more people would use. I haven't seen any data to convince me of that. Whether you'd suddenly start taking meth because it was cheaper, but I think if you had an issue already with meth, then you'd certainly take more, because addicts are quite price sensitive.
Other ways of drug detection. You had some strong opinions on sniffer dogs at festivals, which is it's a contentious issue here in law enforcement, and with the certain politicians that are very much against it. One of which, David Shoebridge, who you mentioned in the book, who's a good friend of mine. I like David. He's actually come on the podcast, Greens MP. And he is at pains to argue against the use of drug detection dogs at festivals. What's your thoughts on it?
I mean, it blew my mind. I just absolutely blew my mind. I couldn't believe that a civilized country was using drug dogs at music festivals to find drugs on teenagers. It's barbaric, I think. I mean, there's more evidence that it encourages teenagers, when they see the drug dog, to take all the drugs out of their pocket and take them all in one go. I mean, it's effectively causing harm. It's not reducing harm. It's clearly not acting as a deterrent. And I think it's seeking to intimidate and criminalize a generation of young people. I don't even understand the strategy. I think it seems counterproductive, and it seems kind of terrible. And when I interviewed a number of people who had been through that experience, and the way that they described it to me was humiliating, it was dehumanizing, and had absolutely no effect on their decision to take drugs ever. Again, they were going to do exactly the same again. It was, I was very surprised, actually. I was surprised generally by the social conservatism in many areas, actually, with regard to drug policy that I found in Australia. Because, we see all the Australian beer commercials and we think you guys are all wandering around in Bermuda shorts and flip-flops and down the beach having a great time. And, very, very easygoing. And certainly that's like the international, image of Australians, is that it's a almost a kind of laissez-faire society. But I was surprised that it is very, very far from that. And I think drug dogs are a very good example of that.
Yeah, well, I think
But yeah,
COVID showed us to be the nanny state that we are, with all the rules and regulations. But that we'll put that one aside. With in the book, there was you made reference to a young child that had some drugs and decided to take the full quantity before he got into the festival because he was worried about being searched. That put into, and I think you interviewed his mother and the impact that that had. So that's a real life example of what you're talking about there with that type of.
I mean,
approach.
I'd argue instead of drug dogs, you should have drug testing centres. And I've heard the argument that it's encouraging people to take drugs, and I don't think the evidence bears that out. I think they're being introduced a little bit more at music festivals here in the UK, and I think that there are anecdotal stories of bad drugs that are going around music festivals. A batch of bad pills that are seeing kids end up in hospital are being picked up quicker, which means the festival can put the word out. If you've got the pink pill with this mark on it, don't take it. It's got strychnine in it, or it's got something terrible in it that's going to make you sick. I think the drug dogs feels like old policy. As we said, it's not working. Let's start thinking of things that might work better. And I think there seems to be maybe a bit of groundswell towards thinking about this as a health issue that needs to be dealt with as such.
Yeah,
and reducing harm. And the question I kept asking myself when I got onto the Australian part of the book and looking at how meth was affecting people, I kept asking myself the question, what does Australia want? What does Australia as a society want? Because meth is here to stay. It's not going away. So how do you better live with meth as part of your society so that the effects that it's having on the society are better, I guess, right? Yeah. And reducing the harm that it's doing to a generation of young people, I would have thought would be quite a noble objective. If fewer kids can die, that's got to be a good thing.
You would think so when you break it down that way. When we talk about drug testing at festivals, there seems to be an appetite for it. Like, some people are pushing for it, and I personally think it's a good idea. I know if I had a young child going to a festival, I'd feel more comforted there that type of setup was there. You said it's done in the UK. Can you just describe the process so people understand fully what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so there'll be a tent. They're run by NGOs, non-profits. We'll have a tent somewhere with a drug testing laboratory there. Anyone can turn up and anonymously, take a sample of whatever they're thinking about taking, and they'll go off and do a test on it and come back and say to them, this has got, some kind of nasty in it or not. It gives the NGO at that point an opportunity to also kind of give them more information on the drug that they're going to be taking, along with associated health advice. Because, if a kid's turning up at a music festival and they've got a pill in their pocket, they're going to take it, unless you tell them, it's got poison in it, in which case that's a really good message. But if they're going to take the pill, at that point they can give them advice and, make sure you drink plenty of water, make sure that you're hanging, that you're with your friends and that you're not off on your own somewhere. Maybe think about doing half of it rather than doing it all in one go, because it's, it's quite strong. It's got this number of milligrams of whatever the active ingredient is. That kind of information, and that point in a music festival can be a great place for disseminating that kind of information. That kind of information, could save someone's life, or it could result in someone not ending up in hospital or having a really terrible time. So, it's a bit of joined up thinking, I guess. It's saying it's not just about testing the drugs. It's about getting access to the people that are going to take those drugs, so that you can give them, you can tell them other helpful things. And if there is something wrong with what they're taking, then you can start disseminating that information more widely.
The naysayers for something like that would argue that it's sending out the wrong messaging, that type of thing. It's encouraging. What would you say to that if someone threw that up at you? But hold it, if you have pill testing, you say it's all right to bring drugs to a festival. What would your response to that line of thinking?
I'd say, well, the only pills that are being tested at the festival are the ones that are at the festival. So whatever your messaging was didn't work because they've brought the pills to the festival and they're going to take them. So what would you rather? They took a pill that had toxins in it that's going to, see them end up in hospital,
Yeah.
or not take a pill that's got toxins in it? Would you rather that someone who was about to take a pill got access to some good advice before they took the pill, if it's maybe their first time and they haven't taken a pill before? Or would you rather they just took it blind and relied on their friends for the information? This argument about the messaging, I think that's what you tried that. You've had 20 or 30 years of sending out the right message and it hasn't worked. So maybe you got to change the message.
Well, I think that's a good message in what you just said. Maybe you've got to change the message if it hasn't worked. Because the war on drugs, and that's the way it's termed, and it's been going 30 years, it's probably 40 years, the war on drugs. If it's not working. The same, your thoughts on testing rooms, injection rooms, like we have set up in King's Cross that came in with a lot of controversy, where people could go in a safe place and then use to inject their drugs. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the King's Cross one came around because, that area was a red light district, right? So
Yes.
there were a lot of places where you could rent a hotel room by the hour. And so people were taking drugs in those rooms. They weren't renting them for the purpose of sex. They were renting them for the purpose of going and taking drugs. So you had a whole load of people in that area who were injecting, and, the ambulances were being called to these rooms to find people who were ODing because they'd taken too much, they'd taken it unsafely, they'd injected it in the wrong way, it was completely unsupervised. It was the Wild West. So since that injecting room has been set up, you don't have that situation anymore. So perversely, you wouldn't have thought this would happen, but the area is cleaned up because there's an injecting room where people can go and do the injecting. We're copying you guys. We're about to set one up here in Scotland, in Glasgow. Copying the success of the King's Cross rooms. I don't see the harm in it. I see it as the opposite. It's harm, it's reducing harm. It's reducing harm in the community. It's reducing the chances that you're going to be walking to work and you're going to see someone slouched in a doorway having OD'd. Again, what do you want? You can't make this thing go away. You can't make drugs go away. They're going to be here. So the war on drugs, to an extent, in the format that we were thinking about it 20 or 30 years ago, where we thought we could stamp it out, that's been lost. The war has changed. It takes a different format now. And so I think if you want to think about how to improve things, you need to start asking different questions.
And change the thinking, the way that we approach it. You made mention of the fact that, and I think you're spot on, that there was police that seemed to have certain strong opinions on drugs. No, this is the way we do it, and not open their mind up to it. They leave the police, and then all of a sudden they've got a different view on it. You've made reference to a certain police minister in New South Wales that just took the tough line and talked tough. We're going to do this. This is the way we do it. Do you think that's just because that's what's expected of people in those positions, that they've got to take the hard line on drugs? Do you think what makes them change their view after they leave an organisation like the police?
Oh, the so-called post-retirement enlightenment syndrome. Yeah. Do you suffer from a bit of that?
I think I probably do. I'll make a note of that. I'm going to steal that. Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing. Every serving police officer I spoke to had towed the party line. I mean, one police officer said to me, what do you think is the best way of reducing methamphetamine use in Queensland, where he worked? And he said, well, we've got to start with these kids smoking weed. That's the gateway drug. I thought, what? What decade are you living in?
Yeah.
It's not the 1960s, But, I guarantee that same guy within 6 months of retiring will be saying, well, we need to start talking about harm minimization strategies, and we need to really look at our rehab system. We've got to stop putting kids in prison for having a bit of weed on them. Yeah, there's definitely a very different answer you get from a serving officer to a retired officer across the board. And one retired officer, retired AFP officer that I interviewed, said, he goes around now doing events, talking about how can we think about this problem differently. And often we'll get approached by serving policemen who say, "Oh, this really resonates. I think you're exactly right. You've really hit the nail on the head with this." But we can't say anything. There's no way we can say anything because that's not the official police line, and we'd lose our jobs if we said things like that. So there's a disconnect there. You can probably speak to this better than I can.
I found it fascinating, and as you're talking there, and it made me reflect on it. I think when you're part of an organisation like police, there's a tendency that you look at things in black and white, like this is the laws. We don't make the laws, but we enforce the laws. So you can't then sort of say, well, I don't believe in this law. It makes you sort of stick your head up in an organisation where they like conformity. I think if you spoke to a lot of police, because police and first responders, whether it be ambulance workers or at the hospital, they see the damage that drugs have done. And I spent 30 years in the police, and I didn't see us get on top of the so-called drug war. And as they say, if you've been doing one thing it hasn't worked, it's insanity to continue on doing that same thing. So I think
But how do you create an environment in which you can have police officers be part of that debate and be able to speak freely? Like, where's the amnesty period where police officers know, well, we could actually say what we think and no one's going to come down on us like a ton of bricks. Well, we're not going to lose our jobs over this.
You've got to change the organisational thinking. But I would like to think that, we all evolve, and the policing has changed from when I joined to what it is now. I'd like to think that there is a freedom, and you could have an open discussion, open debate, have people like yourself and other experts in the field come in and put their point of view across. I do spend a lot of time with David Shoebridge, the Greens MP, and he was always at loggerheads with the police, but I found him to be a fair man, and he was throwing in, considerations for discussion, talking about how policing is done at the festivals, the music festivals, and different things like that. Whether police will do it, I don't know, because it takes a toll. If you step out of the structure and have an opinion, you can sometimes be clipped over the back of the head and told to fall back into line. But it's not working. So we need to change our thinking, and I think if we push the aspect of harm reduction, who can argue with that? Like if there's any reason to want to change what we're doing, well, if we're reducing the harm, that surely has to be a good thing. I suppose this leads us into legalisation. Is it a situation where people should be turned into criminals because they have some might call it a health problem, an addiction? What's your thoughts on that with legalisation or decriminalising?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important distinction. And I've thought about this long and hard, and I cannot find in me any compelling argument for legalising methamphetamine. I think that that really does send the wrong message, and then I think you get into a very difficult situation of, well, then how do you regulate the market? Who's making this available? How widely available is it? How are you going to price it? Who's making profits from it? How do you deal with the fallouts from it? That makes no sense to me. The state can't be, the state must first do no harm, and I don't think you can have dispensaries selling methamphetamine. So let's be clear about that. But I think there is something else in between, which is, continuing to throw people in prison for holding small amounts of methamphetamine, which they've got for their own use, doesn't seem to make much sense to me either. So, I think I fall somewhere in the middle there of saying, if I find a bikie driving down the highway and he's got a kilo of meth strapped to his bike, that guy's up to no good.
Yeah.
He's clearly breaking the law. He's making money from breaking the law. He's selling a world of, he's operating in a way that he needs to feel the full force of the law. But I think if there's a guy walking down the street who's, an addict, and he's got, a 0.1 of a gram in his back pocket, there's no point in criminalizing that guy, because he's beyond that. What he's dealing with is his own pain. What he's dealing with is his own situation. He's not a drug addict because it's fun. He's probably running away from something that's awful that's happened in his life. And I'm afraid all too often when I interviewed methamphetamine users in Australia, I found that, there was a history often, more often than not, way more often than not, of some kind of trauma, some sort of pain, some kind of abuse.
They're
Often
running
abuse,
away from
physical
something.
abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, something in their past. Painful memories that the drug is very effective at dampening, the painful feelings associated with those experiences. And, to then pick someone up who's trying to deal with all of that, by taking a recreational drug that they have been able to buy on the street and saying, well, you're a criminal for it. Personally, I think that's a way of us not taking responsibility as a society for these problems which started in our society. I think there's an empathy gap there, and I think, most people in the Western world, myself included, have some, drug, alcohol, something that we take in order to help ourselves unwind, whether it's a glass of Prosecco or a line of cocaine,
Yeah.
or a point of meth. And I think it's hypocritical of us to have no empathy for people who just choose a different way of doing that to ourselves. And I think one thing, that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we bridge that empathy gap? Because I think if we start thinking about it in those terms, we might get some different solutions.
Okay. Portugal. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with the situation in Portugal with
Yeah.
the laws relating to drugs over there? What's your observations of drugs in Portugal? Given
Yeah,
the
so
fact that it's decriminalised, isn't it, over there? All the drugs?
Yeah, Portugal, also Uruguay now as well, have both gone down that wider decriminalisation path. So, injection rooms are very common. You'll still get put in prison in Portugal if you're caught with a kilo of meth, by the way. But yeah, for personal use, they're not putting people in prison anymore. They have diversion schemes. Same thing in Uruguay. And I remember when that policy came in and people said, oh, well, all the drug users in Europe will all go and live in Portugal. Didn't happen. Drug use hasn't gone up. Seizures haven't gone up. What has changed is that they're putting fewer people in prison for small, drug-related issues. And again, setting up things like injection rooms and safe spaces means that they're disseminating better information to people who are regular and maybe problematic users. So, I think we can all learn from each other. Like I said, we're copying the Sydney King's Cross experience here in the UK now. I think we could all look at Portugal and see what have they done that's worked well. We could look at Uruguay and ask the same thing. I mean, I never thought the United States would be the country that effectively legalized marijuana.
I know that surprised me.
Out of all of us,
Yeah.
I mean, what they've done it, and it's been very effective. And look at the tax revenues are pretty impressive. And the country hasn't ground to a halt.
Yeah. What about drug treatment too? Like in your research into dealing with the addiction, have you got any thoughts on drug treatment, or did you come across people that one type of treatment seemed to work for them?
I think, So drug rehabilitation, I think, is a really important issue. I think you don't get many chances with someone who is engaged in addictive, problematic use, where they actually have enough clarity in that moment to say, I've got a problem, I want help. So I think when they do ask for that help, you've got to make sure you grab that opportunity with both hands and be as effective as possible with it. I was surprised to discover in Australia that rehab was a bit of a wild west. It's so unregulated. There's no great sharing of best practice. There's no coherent sort of strategy. Anyone seems to be able to set up their own rehab program. I met some people who were wildly inappropriate to be dealing with vulnerable people taking their first steps into rehab.
Yeah.
There are. I think you've probably seen there's been stories about rehab centers doing exorcisms on people, and all kinds of wacky stuff. Like
Connor, now that you've mentioned it, I just think of all the people I know that have managed to clean themselves up or tidy up an addiction. And you're quite right. It's not one sort of type thing. It's one person will swear for, on the mid-north coast, you've got this person, he's a guru, you go there, that'll sort you out. So different things. So, I hadn't really thought about that.
I'd prefer to see a degree of regulation. I think we should probably look at the industry as a whole, either at state or federal. I know you guys love things happening at state level, but maybe whether it's state or federal, but at least some sort of central joined up thinking about, well, what is best practice in rehab? How do we get people into rehab and keep them in rehab? And look, rehab doesn't work out for everyone first time. It takes 2, 3, 4, 5 goes, however many goes it takes. We want to get people out of the other side, and the best way to do that is not with exorcisms. That's not to say that Christian groups, religious groups, charitable groups, I mean, your guru mate couldn't still make a contribution, but I would just want to make sure that people aren't falling through those cracks, in places that are being badly run and being badly managed or being run by crackpots. I think it's too important. It's too important, and it's too precious a chance when someone actually presents themselves at rehab and says, "Help me," to kind of let fall by the wayside. I think you've really got to grab that opportunity.
Okay. Well, look, I've got to thank you for really opening my eyes, and I hope the people that are listening to this podcast, it just gives them another way of looking at how we deal with the drug situation, in particular with meth addiction, because I know it is a concern to a lot of people. Is there any closing thoughts, your observation of the whole drug scene in Australia, that if you had to, the magic wand, where would be the first place you'd go, or the first step that you'd take to stop what we're clearly losing at this stage?
I think it would be addressing that empathy gap. I think it would be looking at, as a society, at what do you want? Australians it's such a pragmatic society. You guys are so good at getting stuff done once you kind of put your minds to it. And I think Australia could really take a lead and really be an example to other countries in how to turn around drug policy. I think this old sending the right message and being hard on drugs and being hard on people that use drugs, I think it's for the birds. I think it's been tried. It's been tried not just by Australia, it's been tried by everybody, and it hasn't worked. So, like we both said, it's time to start asking different questions and see if you get different answers. And I think moving towards things like harm minimization and, better rehab and being a bit smarter about supply reduction, these are all strategies that can all work together. The whole thing has to be thought through, as a piece. And I think seems to be moving in the right direction. The diversion schemes seem to be sneaking in the judicial process, and intelligence gathering again could be better by improving relationships with China, which seems to be slowly happening. So, I'm optimistic. I think we could have this conversation again in 10 years' time, and hopefully, be a very different picture we'd be talking about.
Okay. Well, I think that's a nice way to wrap it up. But I just want to ask you one more question. What's your next adventure? Are you working on anything else? And I want to speak to you off camera about your plan, how you infiltrated the cartel in Myanmar. I think we can work on that. Give you a better cover story.
The book has come out in Australia and New Zealand, and there's now interest in the UK because there are some green shoots of meth use outside of the established kind of gay communities in places like Manchester. that have made enough people in the UK think, oh, we need to get ahead of this in case it turns into a situation, akin to what's going on in Australia. So I'm working on doing a revision of the book for the UK market, with maybe, using Australia as a case study, but kind of hopefully getting people in the UK to wake up and see that, this might be coming down the pipe for us too.
Okay, well, that's something definitely worthwhile. So thanks very much for coming on Eye Catch Killers, and all the best with your future endeavours.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thanks, Connor.